The crystalline spires of the Stellar Academy pierced the lavender sky of Meridian Prime, their surfaces reflecting the light of 3 moons. Inside one of the Academy's research chambers, Ambassador Rose watched the alien scientist with growing fascination. Dr. Lyra stood perfectly still, her silvery skin catching the ambient light as she worked, her forearms moving in precise, calculated patterns across the holographic displays. The human ambassador couldn't help but notice how the Meridian's movements seemed almost choreographed, yet utterly devoid of warmth. Like most of her species, Dr. Lyra approached everything with cold, mathematical precision, especially matters of pair bonding and reproduction. Your species' approach to mate selection continues to baffle me, Ambassador, Dr. Lyra said suddenly, her violet eyes remaining fixed on the data streams. The chemical cocktail you call love seems hideously inefficient. Rose leaned against the nearby console, a slight smile playing across his face. And your species' approach seems terribly lonely to me, Doctor. Lonely? Lyra's head tilted exactly 20 degrees, the standard Meridian gesture of dismissal. We eliminated such emotional irregularities centuries ago. Our breeding programs are optimized for genetic diversity and evolutionary advantage. Nothing more is required. But Rose noticed something in that moment, a barely perceptible tremor in Lyra's lower left hand as she spoke. For a species that prided itself on perfect control, even that tiny slip was remarkable. Then why did you request me specifically for this cultural exchange? Rose asked quietly. There are dozens of human ambassadors. Yet you chose the one who specializes in emotional intelligence and relationship dynamics. For the first time, Lyra's hands stopped their precise movements. The laboratory fell silent except for the soft hum of equipment. When she finally turned to face Rose, there was something different in those violet eyes, something that looked almost like uncertainty. Your species represents an anomaly in our understanding of advanced civilizations, she said carefully. You achieved faster than light travel while still embracing primitive pair bonding behaviors. You maintained emotional connections despite achieving technological supremacy. It requires study. Rose took a careful step closer. Or perhaps you're beginning to wonder if your people lost something important when they decided to engineer emotion out of the equation. Lyra's silver skin flushed with a faint blue tinge, a physiological response she couldn't quite control. That would be highly illogical, Ambassador. The most fascinating things in the universe usually are, Rose replied softly. And please, call me James. The look that crossed Lyra's face then was one of genuine conflict, an expression that would have scandalized her peers. She opened her mouth to respond, then closed it again, her carefully constructed worldview showing its first tiny crack. And in that moment, though neither of them fully realized it yet, something profound had begun to change. A hypothesis was forming in Lyra's brilliant mind, one that would challenge everything her civilization believed about the nature of connection, intimacy, and what it truly meant to evolve. 3 weeks after their initial conversation, Dr. Lyra found herself experiencing something entirely unprecedented: distraction. Her research productivity had dropped by 13.7%, and she had caught herself staring out the laboratory windows at the exact time Ambassador Rose usually crossed the academy grounds. Today, she watched as he stopped to help a young Meridian student who had dropped their data crystals. Instead of simply pointing out the logical solution, Rose knelt down, gathered the crystals himself, and offered them back with a warm smile. The student's confusion was evident. Such physical assistance was not part of Meridian's social protocols. Your behavior patterns are disrupting our entire social structure, Lyra announced later that afternoon when Rose visited her lab. The younger ones are beginning to mimic your inefficient helping rituals. Rose settled into his now usual spot by her console. Is that really such a bad thing? I saw 3 students working together yesterday. They solved their quantum mechanics problem in half the usual time. Correlation is not causation, Lyra replied automatically, but her lower hands fidgeted with her instruments, a nervous habit she'd developed recently, and couldn't seem to eliminate. True, Rose agreed. But connection isn't just about efficiency, Lyra. It's about making life richer, fuller. Our lives are perfectly adequate, she insisted, but even to her own ears, the words sounded hollow. We have eliminated war, poverty, and social discord through logical optimization. Rose stood and walked to the window. And yet you've never seen your 3 moons rise together just because it's beautiful. You've never laughed until your sides hurt. You've never felt the comfort of someone holding you when you're sad. We don't get sad, Lyra said, but her voice wavered slightly. No? Rose turned to face her. Then why do you maintain your ancestors' music archives? I've heard the songs they wrote before the Great Rationalization. They're full of emotion, longing, joy. Lyra's skin flushed that telling shade of blue again. Those are maintained purely for historical documentation. Is that why you listen to them at night when you think no one's monitoring your lab? Her head snapped up. How did you? I noticed things, Lyra. Like how you've started moving less rigidly. How you've begun using contractions in your speech sometimes. How you watch me when you think I'm not looking. I don't. For the first time in her life, Lyra found herself unable to form a coherent response. Rose took a careful step toward her. Your people didn't evolve without emotions. You chose to suppress them. That means they're still there, waiting to be rediscovered. The Council would never. I'm not talking about the Council. I'm talking about you, Lyra. What do you want? The question hit her like a physical force. Want? Meridians didn't want. They assessed, analyzed, and chose optimal outcomes based on logical parameters. But as she stood there, looking at this human with his kind eyes and gentle smile, she realized she did want something. She wanted to understand why her heart rate increased by 22% when he was near. Why she kept thinking about the way his eyes crinkled when he laughed. Why the thought of him leaving when his diplomatic mission ended caused a sensation of physical pain in her chest. I want to understand, she finally whispered, her perfect posture crumbling slightly. Help me understand. Rose's smile then was like watching a star being born, bright and full of promise. He held out his hand to her, a gesture she had seen humans make countless times, but had never fully grasped the significance of until now. Understanding starts with trust, he said softly. And sometimes trust means letting go of what we think we know. Slowly, watching her own hand as if it belonged to someone else, Lyra reached out and placed her upper right hand in his. The warmth of his skin against hers sent a shiver through her entire body, a response that defied every principle of meridian physiology she had ever studied. And in that simple touch, something inside her shifted irrevocably. A door she hadn't even known existed began to open, leading to possibilities that both thrilled and terrified her logical mind. The Academy's central garden was empty at this late hour, its bioluminescent flowers casting a soft glow across the crystalline paths. Dr. Lyra stood before the ancient singing fountain, her research tablet forgotten in her lower hands while her upper ones traced patterns in the water. Your emotional contamination has spread to 16 other researchers, a cold voice stated from behind her. Lyra turned to face Council Member Thex, her superior and one of the architects of modern Meridian society. His silver skin had taken on the grayish tinge of age, and his violet eyes held no trace of warmth. The data suggests increased efficiency in collaborative projects, Lyra responded, falling back on her scientific training. Do not attempt to rationalize this corruption, Thex said. We have monitored your interactions with the human ambassador. Your behavior has become erratic. Your work performance has degraded. You have begun displaying physical symptoms of emotional instability. Lyra straightened her spine, adopting the proper meridian posture. My research into human social dynamics requires deep immersion. You were not assigned to research human social dynamics, Thex cut in. Your task was to study their technological advancement patterns. Instead, you have allowed yourself to become compromised. A month ago, Lyra would have immediately accepted the correction and requested reassignment. But now, something inside her rebelled against the cold dismissal of everything she had discovered. Perhaps we were wrong, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Thex's eyes narrowed. Explain. Our ancestors chose to eliminate emotions because they saw them as a weakness. But what if they're actually a form of strength? The humans have achieved technological progress equal to ours while maintaining their emotional connections. Their art, their music, their ability to innovate, it all stems from their emotional capacity. These are dangerous thoughts, Dr. Lyra. Thex's tone carried a clear warning. The human ambassador will complete his mission and leave in 30 days. You will cease all personal interaction with him immediately. The thought of not seeing James again caused a physical pain in Lyra's chest. She pressed one of her hands against it, a gesture that didn't go unnoticed by Thex. You see? He said. Already you display symptoms of emotional dependency. This is precisely what our ancestors sought to eliminate. Pain. Longing. The weakness of attachment. But what if attachment isn't weakness? Lyra challenged, surprising herself with her own boldness. Jane showed me records of human parents lifting vehicles to save their offspring. Artists creating masterpieces from their grief. Scientists driven by passion to make breakthrough discoveries. And he has shown you records of their wars? Their crimes of passion? The chaos that emotions breed? Thex countered. Yes, Lyra admitted. He showed me everything. The good and the bad. That's something we never do here, acknowledge both sides of any equation. Thex moved closer, his height imposing as he looked down at her. You have two choices, Dr. Lyra. End this inappropriate interaction and undergo emotional reconditioning, or face exile from the Academy and your position within our society. The old Lyra would have immediately chosen reconditioning. It was the logical choice. The safe choice. But as she stood there, she thought of James's smile, of the warmth of his hand, of the way her world had expanded beyond cold equations into something rich and frighteningly beautiful. You're right, she said finally. Emotions are dangerous. They're unpredictable. They make us vulnerable. She paused, her skin beginning to glow with a faint blue luminescence, a clear sign of emotional activation that made Thex step back in alarm. But they also make us stronger. More complete. More alive. This is your final warning, Thex said. Choose carefully. Lyra looked up at the three moons through the garden's transparent dome. For the first time, she truly saw their beauty, understanding now why humans found such joy in simple astronomical phenomena. I choose to learn, she said quietly. I choose to feel. Even if it means pain. Even if it means starting over. As Thex turned and strode away, his rigid posture radiating disapproval, Lyra felt something new bubble up inside her. It took her a moment to recognize it from her research into human expressions of emotion. She was laughing. The sound echoed through the garden, causing the bioluminescent flowers to pulse in response. It was imperfect, awkward, and utterly wonderful. Somewhere in the back of her mind, she knew she had just altered the course of her life irrevocably. And for the first time in her existence, the thought of an uncertain future filled her not with dread, but with exhilarating anticipation. James found Lyra in her private research chamber, all four of her hands moving frantically across multiple holographic displays. The room was in unusual disarray, with data crystals scattered across surfaces and ancient text projected on every available wall. They're going to erase me, she said without turning around. But first I need you to see something. Her voice carried an urgency he'd never heard before. James moved closer, noting the subtle glow emanating from her silver skin, a sign of intense emotional activity that would have horrified her just months ago. What am I looking at? He asked, studying the ancient meridian texts that filled the air around them. The truth. Lyra's hands danced across the interfaces, bringing up more documents. I've been digging through restricted archives. The Great Rationalization, it wasn't a choice our ancestors made. It was forced upon them. James stepped closer, his eyes widening as he read the ancient records. A biological weapon? A virus, Lyra confirmed, her violet eyes bright with discovery and fear. It didn't kill. It did something far worse. It damaged the parts of our brains that process emotion. The survivors faced a choice: watch their children suffer through the same neural degradation, or accept genetic modification that would suppress emotional capacity entirely. She brought up another display, showing brain scans. But look, the capacity for emotion wasn't eliminated. It was just locked away. Generation after generation, we told ourselves we chose logic over feeling, that we evolved beyond emotion. But it was all a lie. James absorbed this revelation, understanding its massive implications. That's why your people kept the music archives. Why you maintained records of art and literature from before. Some part of you knew. Yes. Lyra's hands finally stilled. And now the emotional centers in my brain are reactivating. The more time I spend with you, the more I feel, the more the suppression breaks down. The Council knows this. That's why they want to recondition me. They're afraid. Afraid of what? That others will follow. That the careful control they've maintained for centuries will crumble. She turned to face him fully. Already, my emotional awakening has triggered similar responses in other researchers. It's like a chain reaction. James finished softly. Yes. The Council believes if they don't stop it now, it could spread through our entire population. They're right. And James? Her voice caught, another new experience. I don't want to be reconditioned. I don't want to go back to not feeling. Even with all the pain and uncertainty, I choose this. I choose. She stopped, struggling with words that had no equivalent in traditional Meridian language. James stepped closer, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from her glowing skin. What do you choose, Lyra? I choose love, she whispered, the word coming out like a revelation. I love you. It's inefficient and illogical and absolutely terrifying, and I love you. James reached out, gently touching her face. She leaned into his hand, her skin pulsing with blue light where they connected. I love you too, he said softly. A sudden alarm blared through the chamber. Lyra's eyes widened in fear. They're coming. The Council's guards. They'll take me for reconditioning, and then they'll make you leave. James cut her off with a kiss. For a moment, Lyra froze, overwhelmed by the new sensation. Then she melted into it, all four of her hands moving to hold him close as her skin blazed with light. When they broke apart, James's expression was determined. I'm not letting them erase you. We're getting out of here. But where would we go? The Council controls everything on Meridian Prime. Then we'll leave Meridian Prime. The human delegation has a ship. We can be in neutral space before they realize what's happened. He gripped her hands. But it has to be your choice, Lyra. Everything you know is here. Lyra looked around her research chamber, at the life she'd built, at all the careful, logical patterns she'd followed for so long. Then she looked at James, and felt the wonderful, terrifying storm of emotions he'd awakened in her. The choice, when it came down to it, wasn't hard at all. Let's go, she said, quickly gathering specific data crystals. But first, we need to download these records. The truth about our history, our people deserve to know. Even if we're not here to see what they do with it. As the alarm continued to blare and the sound of approaching footsteps echoed down the corridor, Lyra felt something new bloom in her chest. Hope. The crystalline corridors of the Stellar Academy had never seemed so long. James and Lyra ran, their footsteps echoing off the transparent walls as the security alarms continued their piercing wail. Behind them, the measured steps of council guards grew closer. Wait, Lyra said suddenly, pulling James into a small research alcove. Her skin was pulsing with rapid flashes of blue light, a clear sign of the emotional turmoil she was no longer trying to hide. The other researchers, the ones who were beginning to feel. I can't leave them. James checked the corridor. What do you want to do? Lyra's fingers flew across the nearest console. Before they locked me out of the system, I prepared a data burst. The truth about our history, about the virus, about everything. I can send it to every researcher in the Academy. They'll just block it. A smile crossed Lyra's face, an expression that was becoming more natural with each passing day. Not if I use the emergency broadcast system. The one designed to be unblockable in case of catastrophic events. Her hands moved faster. It will take exactly 43 seconds to upload. The guards will be here in 30. James warned, hearing the approaching footsteps. Then we'll have to hold them off for 13 more. She didn't look up from her work, but one of her lower hands reached out to squeeze his briefly. The gesture, so human in its need for reassurance, made James's heart tighten. The first guard appeared at the end of the corridor, tall, silver-skinned, and moving with mechanical precision. "Dr. Lyra!" he called out, his voice emotionless. "Your behavior has been deemed destructive to societal harmony. Submit to reconditioning immediately." 20 seconds, Lyra whispered, her fingers still dancing across the console. The guard raised a neural suppressor, a weapon designed to temporarily disable higher brain functions. James stepped in front of Lyra, shielding her with his body. "This is your final warning," the guard announced. "Step aside, Ambassador. This is an internal Meridian matter." 10 seconds, Lyra's voice was tense behind him. "She's not your property," James said firmly. "She's a person, with the right to choose her own path. Choice is inefficient," a new voice stated. Council member Thex emerged behind the guard, his aged face set in lines of disapproval. "Dr. Lyra's emotional contamination must be contained before it spreads further." 3 seconds, Lyra whispered. "You're too late," James replied, allowing himself a small smile. "It's already spreading." "Done!" Lyra called out triumphantly. Throughout the academy, every screen, every holographic display, every data interface suddenly blazed to life. Ancient texts and hidden records poured across them, revealing the truth that had been buried for generations. But more than that, they showed brain scans, Lyra's brain scans, documenting the reawakening of emotional centers, the blossoming of neural pathways that had been suppressed for centuries. And then, through every speaker in the building, came music. The forgotten songs of ancient meridians, full of love and loss, joy and sorrow, all the beautiful chaos of feeling that their ancestors had been forced to lock away. The guard's hand wavered. The neural suppressor lowered slightly as the music washed over him. Around them, doors began opening as other researchers emerged from their labs, drawn by the sound and the cascade of revelation flowing across their screens. What is this sensation?" one young researcher asked, pressing a hand to her chest. "Emotion," Lyra answered, stepping out from behind James. "Real emotion. Not just the echo of it we use in our experiments. This is what we lost. What was taken from us. What we can choose to reclaim." Her skin was glowing brighter than ever, and as James watched in amazement, other meridians began to shimmer as well. The corridor filled with soft blue light as long-suppressed emotional centers began to stir. "This is dangerous," Thex declared, but there was something different in his voice, a tremor of uncertainty. This is... He stopped, staring at his own hands, which had begun to glow for the first time in centuries. "This is freedom," Lyra said softly. She turned to James, taking his hand openly, unafraid now of who might see. "And it's time for us to go. The rest is up to them." As they ran toward the landing pad where the human diplomatic shuttle waited, the sounds of awakening followed them, gasps of surprise, cries of joy, and here and there, carried on the recycled air of the academy, the first tentative sounds of Meridian laughter. 1 year later, Earth Embassy, Neutral Space Station Unity. Lyra stood at the observation window, all 4 hands pressed against the transparent material as she watched ships arrive from Meridian Prime. Her silver skin glowed with a soft, constant blue, no longer a sign of emotional disturbance, but of contentment. Behind her, James wrapped his arms around her waist, and she leaned back against him. "Nervous?" he asked softly. "Excited," she corrected. "The preliminary reports are better than we could have hoped for." The door chimed, and a familiar figure entered, Council Member Thex. But he was changed from the rigid authority figure they'd last seen. His posture was more relaxed, and his skin held a faint luminescence that would have been unthinkable a year ago. "Dr. Lyra!" He greeted her, then nodded to James. "Ambassador Rose. Your hypothesis has been proven correct. The emotional awakening has spread to approximately 63% of our population. Any negative effects?" Lyra asked, her scientific training still evident in her questioning. "Some," Thex admitted. "We've had to establish counseling centers to help people cope with their emerging feelings. There have been instances of emotional outbursts, confused relationships, temporary productivity decreases." He paused, and then did something that would have been impossible a year ago. He smiled. "But there have also been extraordinary developments." He activated a holographic display, showing images from Meridian Prime. The rigid geometric patterns of their architecture were now softened with organic curves. The formerly stark academic halls were filled with art. Gardens bloomed where once there had been only efficient hydroponics. "Our scientists report increased innovation in multiple fields," Thex continued. "It seems emotion doesn't hinder progress, it inspires it. Our artists are creating works that rival those of our ancestors. And," he hesitated, then continued softly, "I heard my granddaughter laugh for the first time last week." Lyra squeezed James's hand, feeling the warmth of his skin against hers. "And the council?" "Reformed," Thex replied. "We now understand that true advancement comes not from suppressing parts of ourselves, but from embracing all that we are, logic and emotion in harmony." He straightened slightly. "Which is why I'm here. The Council wishes to offer you both an opportunity." He produced a data crystal. "We're establishing a new department at the Stellar Academy, the Institute of Emotional Integration. We need leaders who understand both the scientific and personal aspects of what our people are experiencing. Who better than the ones who started it all?" Lyra felt tears form in her eyes, another new experience she'd come to treasure. "You want us to come back?" "As honored teachers, not outcasts," Thex confirmed. "There is so much we need to relearn, so much wisdom in other species that we once dismissed. Will you help us?" Lyra turned to James, seeing in his eyes the same love that had started this whole revolution. "What do you think?" "I think," he said with a smile, "that I've always wanted to teach. And I can't think of a better place to do it than where we first fell in love." Lyra turned back to Thex. "We accept. But on one condition." "Name it." "The first class has to be about dancing." Her eyes sparkled with mischief, another wonderful emotional discovery. "I've found it's impossible to maintain rigid logical control while trying to dance to human music." Thex's surprised laugh filled the room, deep, genuine, and full of joy. "Agreed. Though I warn you, I have been practicing. My granddaughter is quite insistent on daily dance sessions." As Thex left to make the arrangements, Lyra and James turned back to the observation window. Below them, ships from a dozen worlds docked at Unity Station, humans, Meridians, and countless other species coming together, learning from each other, growing together. "Did you ever imagine," Lyra asked softly, "when you first came to the Academy, that this would be the result?" James pulled her closer. "I imagined that love could change things. I just didn't know how much. Love is still highly inefficient," she teased, her skin pulsing with happiness. "Completely illogical," he agreed. "And absolutely perfect," they said together. As they stood there, watching the stars spin slowly past the station's windows, Lyra felt the wonderful chaos of emotion flowing through her. Love, hope, excitement, joy, all mixing together in a way that defied mathematical analysis. And she wouldn't have it any other way. Sometimes, she realized, the most logical choice of all was to follow your heart.